Welcome back. Our next guest was held hostage for 15 months in Somalia and survived months of gruesome torture and abuse. Somehow, Amanda Lindhout became stronger through that experience, but not bitter. In fact, quite the opposite. Now, back in 2008, Lindhout went into Somalia as a freelance TV reporter, hoping to bring worldwide attention to the fighting and social unrest there. This video was not in Somalia, but it shows Amanda as a reporter sort of around that time period. She ultimately did succeed in getting her message out, but not in the way she set to do that. Amanda Lindhout wrote a book, A House in the Sky, to share her story of resilience and forgiveness after being kidnapped by rebels who held her captive in unspeakable violent conditions for 460 days. Now, in her book, Lindhout tells us her captors, some barely teenagers, were victims themselves, struggling to survive in a culture of war, famine, and poverty. Amanda vowed that if she made it out alive, she would dedicate her life to helping people in Somalia, and she did that by starting the Global Enrichment Foundation, a nonprofit that supports development aid and education projects in Somalia and Kenya. So please welcome author, humanitarian, and one of Canada's 100 most powerful women, as named by the Women's Executive Network, Amanda Lindhout. Thank you so much for coming in.
Good morning. It's great to be here.
Good morning to you. Now, I want to start off talking a little bit about the title of the book, A House in the Sky. This is really important. Tell our viewers why you called the book this.
Well, A House in the Sky was the mental place that I went while I was in captivity when things were the very worst. So it was a place that I could access in my own mind, where memory and imagination carried me through some of the horrors of what I was experiencing, a place where I could dream about the life that I hoped to go on to have if I made it out of there alive. That was my house in the sky.
So in your book, you show great compassion for your captors. I don't know if you felt that way at the time, or looking back you became compassionate for them, but how is that possible?
Yeah, it does surprise people to hear me talk about things like compassion and forgiveness after everything that I went through there, but I spent 15 and a half months with a group of young fundamentalists, the youngest of them being 14 years old, and I had an understanding that they are very much products of their environment. These young people have been born into a culture of war. They are shaped by the war and the violence around them, and I believe that was very much a motivating factor that led them to create the kind of suffering that they did for me.
Now, you've said that when a human, puts suffering on someone else, it usually comes from a place of their own suffering. Would that apply even, for example, to the people who killed the soldiers this week in Canada?
It might be hard for people to hear me say this, but I do think that it applies. I think that it's just a universal truth. When you're perfectly healthy and happy, you don't have the capacity or the ability to create suffering for another human being. In my case, for example, I always believed that my kidnappers were driven by the need to create suffering for someone more than their own suffering. And I think it's just true when we talk about violence anywhere around the world, including the horrible events that have been happening this week.
Well, the Global Enrichment Fund is, I find this amazing that you came back immediately and started up a foundation. You went to St. FX to get training to help you with that. Why don't you just speak to that for a second?
Well, while I was in captivity and thinking about what I wanted to do with my life if I made it out, it was very clear to me that I wanted to be of service in the world somehow, and what seemed to make sense was to create some positive change in that part of the world where young people don't have much of an opportunity to have an education. Again, my young captors were people who didn't have that opportunity. So when I was released, came back home, I did come and study at St. FX at the Coady Institute and started my own nonprofit organization, which 4.5 years later has provided aid and education to about 200,000 people living in Somalia, and we've raised millions of dollars to do that.
We're just showing some pictures right now of you doing your work, and it must be, when you go back, I mean, do you see evidence of change? Obviously, you've helped a lot of people, but how do you see it on the faces of the people you're helping?
I really do see change, and that's what motivates me to keep going. And I shouldn't say just me. I'm surrounded by so many teams of wonderful people here in Canada, Kenya, and Somalia, working to help Somali refugees and people suffering within Somalia. But when you provide education to somebody, you fundamentally change their lives, and we've been able to do that for so many young people who otherwise would not have the opportunity to study in that part of the world. And I think think we will see the effects of that change in a generation or so.
You posted this video, I took it from your Twitter profile, of these boys in Somalia in school, smiling and laughing. Many of these boys would probably not too far from the age of some of the people that held you captive.
That's exactly right. And these people live in internally displaced people's camps where, war and violence completely surrounds them. It's so imperative that young people have opportunities to have an education, so there are alternatives to joining these sort of extremist groups like the one responsible for abducting me.
And your foundation is providing support to this school, so basically helping make these boys as happy as they are.
Yeah, in this particular school, we have over 800 students.
That's amazing.
And interestingly, this camp where this school is, I was en route to when I was abducted, and I didn't make it there that day. But I'm now in a position to be able to really help the people who live in that camp.
And you're using that position to do good work overseas, but also here. I know you're coming back to Atlantic Canada for WE Day in November, really just a couple of weeks. And today, you have a message for students. You're the keynote speaker at a conference speaking to university students at St. FX.
Tonight at 7:30, I'm going to be speaking at St. FX as part of the Leaders Summit at X. And my message for young people is all about the difference that one person can make in the world. And yes, I've lived through a lot, and I speak a lot about compassion and forgiveness, but there's another really important message that I like to share, which is when you really believe in something, you can move that dream forward no matter what. When I started the Global Enrichment Foundation, a lot of people thought it was a strange response for me to have, given the severity of everything that I had been through, but I didn't doubt it, and I moved it forward, and I found other people who believed in it. And now, just 4.5 years later, as I say, we've reached about 200,000 people, and I do think that is a powerful message for young people to realize that when you have a dream and you believe in it, you can really make change happen.
Well, I know when you come here for WE Day, I remember when I was a youngster, they didn't have WE Day. There seems to be a culture among young people now about reaching out and making a difference. Do you feel that optimism as well?
I get so excited when I have the opportunity to speak to young people, particularly the age group that is at WE Day, because this is a generation that is so motivated to create some difference in the world, and they're looking for opportunities to be able to do that. And there's such an electricity and an energy around an event like WE Day.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming in and chatting with us today, Amanda.
Thank you so much.
All right. If you want to find out more about Amanda, you can do so. You can also read her book. It's called A House in the Sky. It is an international bestseller, and it's going to be made into a movie, which we didn't even get to talk about that. But that's for another conversation. You can find out more at amandalindhout.com, and you can follow her on Twitter at Amanda Lindhout.